Every system has cracks, but what happens when the truth finds its way through one? Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. The sound of truth, when it breaks, is never loud. Sometimes it slips in like a whisper in the hallway of power. Other times it emerges slowly, like dawn edging across a window pane. But always it begins in silence. Alex Rivera never planned to be the story. He was the kind of person who stayed late after others had left, combing through budget spreadsheets line by line, cross-checking language in funding bills, flagging inconsistencies others skimmed past. He wasn't trying to be noble. He just thought, if you're going to serve the people, you should probably know where the money's going. He had taken the job with quiet pride. A policy aide on immigration and border issues in one of the most high-profile progressive offices in the country. Working for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez meant you had a front-row seat to the promises of reform. He believed in that mission, until the mission started to bend. It began with a memo. Late one night, alone in the quiet hum of his workspace, Alex opened a quarterly financial report. A string of line items caught his attention. Strategic Aid Allocations Category 4. The wording was vague. He remembered reviewing a previous draft that had categorized these funds differently. A small detail, one most wouldn't notice, but Alex did. Curious, he opened a second document, a list of NGO partnerships slated to receive these funds. That's when things got murky. 3 names he'd never seen before. No public disclosures, no confirmation of delivery. The trail went cold under a layer of nondescript administrative language and acronyms that were never explained. He raised it at the next team meeting. The reaction was subtle. A slight pause, a nod, a vague promise to look into it. But after that, things changed. Tasks shifted away from Alex. Meetings once open to him were now invitation only. He was asked to review language on climate instead of border policy. His desk, once central to the legislative team, was moved to a quieter corner. He'd been, as he later put it, politely ghosted by democracy. But Alex didn't back down. He filed internal memos, flagged further discrepancies, documented everything. And that's when the silence turned into threat. He was asked to sign an NDA. It was standard procedure, he was told, just formalizing what was already understood about confidentiality. But when he read it, his stomach twisted. It wasn't standard. It was sweeping. It barred him from speaking not only about internal processes, but about any knowledge of funding decisions past, present, or future. The penalties were severe, the language airtight. He didn't sign. Not at first. He tried instead to go through official channels. He approached the Ethics Committee liaison, sent a letter to a legislative inspector, but the doors stayed closed. Every whisper of concern was met with tighter containment. Eventually he signed the NDA. He needed the job. He needed to eat. He needed time to figure out what to do next. Then came the spark. A speech, a rally, a headline. AOC stood before a crowd, fire in her voice, calling for transparency, justice, and accountability at the border. She spoke of clarity, of ethics, of exposing the hidden channels of corruption that, she claimed, plagued others. Alex watched from his apartment, eyes on the screen, heartbreaking, because he had tried to expose those same channels. And the person standing on stage had told him to look the other way. That night he wrote a letter. I served your office with integrity, but I will not carry your secrets anymore. He didn't send it. He folded it, slipped it in an envelope, and mailed it anonymously to the one person in Washington he thought might actually read it without tossing it aside. Senator John Kennedy. Kennedy wasn't flashy. He didn't tweet hot takes. He wasn't adored by cable news. But he had a reputation, gritty, meticulous, and absolutely allergic to fiscal smoke and mirrors. He read the letter, all of it. The handwriting was nervous, but the details were sharp, real. The numbers matched documents his office had long tried to subpoena. The claims pointed toward a larger web, one he had suspected but could never quite prove. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't leak it to the media. He called a meeting. And in a quiet, windowless room 2 floors beneath the Capitol Rotunda, he met Alex Rivera for the first time. Alex shook, not from fear, but from finally being heard. Senator, he said, voice low, they made me feel crazy for noticing. Kennedy didn't blink. You're not crazy, son. You're just early. That night, a different kind of battle began. Not a partisan one, not a personal vendetta. a truth war. One that would unfold in hearings, headlines, and hashtags. But it started here, with one voice, one whistle, breaking the silence. If you were in Alex's position, would you blow the whistle or stay silent to protect your future? Let us know in the comments. The thing about fire is it never starts big. It begins in a corner, a whisper, a temperature change. But when it spreads, it consumes. 2 weeks after the quiet off-the-record meeting in the Capitol's underground chamber where Senator John Kennedy first heard Alex Rivera's story, Washington remained blissfully unaware. No leaks, no headlines. Just a hum of activity behind closed doors as Kennedy's team quietly verified every detail, audit trails, internal memos, sealed transfers. It was all there. And then it happened. The moment no one saw coming, not even Kennedy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped onto the Capitol press stage with a ferocity that electrified the air. The podium lights gleamed, cameras locked in. Her team flanked her like a phalanx. "I want to be absolutely clear," she began, her voice firm, her tone rehearsed. "Today I have filed a $250 million lawsuit against Senator John Kennedy." The words crashed like thunder. "I will not stand by as my name, my mission, and my integrity are dragged through political mud. This is not about policy disputes. This is about lies. Deliberate, dangerous, designed to dismantle the work we've done for immigrants and border communities." She paused for breath, scanning the room. The silence hung heavy. She didn't mention Alex, didn't mention the audits or the reports. She didn't need to. She had just lit the fuse, and the whole room smelled smoke. Within hours, every outlet from NPR to Fox was ablaze with headlines. AOC sues Kennedy for $250 million, defamation or defense mechanism, civil war on the Hill. But Kennedy didn't rush to a podium. He didn't tweet. He opened the letter slowly, read through the complaint in silence, then set it down like an old song he'd heard before. Then he turned to his aide. "Move the oversight hearing to Tuesday. It's time we initiated discovery." That single phrase, uttered with calm precision, shifted the winds. This wasn't just a legal challenge anymore. This was war, fought not with fury but with facts. 3 days later, the hearing room overflowed. Cameras were stationed in every corner. C-SPAN's viewership quietly tripled. Kennedy stood with his usual poise, no theatrics, just that Louisiana composure forged in old-school civics and slow-burn discipline. "Madam Chair," he said, voice as smooth as molasses but sharp as a blade, "I request the floor to present testimony from a former congressional aide with direct knowledge of irregularities in border policy funding." Gasps, shuffling, tension crackled in the air like static. And then the doors opened. Alex Rivera walked in. His blazer was slightly wrinkled. He carried no notes, just a file folder and the look of someone who had waited too long to speak. Cameras followed every step. He passed AOC without turning. Her jaw tensed, her legal team leaned in, whispering, but none of that mattered anymore. He had the floor. "I was part of the team handling immigration and NGO funding," he began, voice steady. "I believed in the mission. I still believe in the cause, but I saw things that didn't align with what we told the public." He unfolded the document in front of him, an NDA. This was meant to silence me. Reporters scribbled furiously, phones buzzed. Even the usually unflappable committee chair sat up straighter. Kennedy rose slowly. "Let's start with a simple document log," he said. "Transfer 3C71, $4.2 million. Labeled strategic advocacy aid, but no line item review, no ethics filing, no NGO recipient listed." He projected the document. Receipts, initials, dates. AOC's team objected. The chair overruled. It speaks directly to the allegations in the lawsuit. It stands. For 3 hours, Kennedy guided the hearing like a conductor, not with aggression, but with truth, layered and patient. "Did you raise concerns, Mr. Rivera?" "Yes." They were dismissed. "And this NDA? What was its purpose?" "To protect the office's image, but at the expense of the truth." Outside, protests erupted. On one side, defend AOC. On the other, show us the books. Inside, Kennedy remained still. His hands never shook. His voice never rose. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about clarity. AOC sat motionless, her attorneys conferring. She muttered once, "This is theatre." But the hearing had moved past rhetoric. The documents on the screen now whispered truths even louder than Alex's voice. Wire transfers, audit mismatches, a photo of Alex with AOC in a closed-door session. The back of it inscribed in AOC's handwriting, "Stay committed no matter the pressure." And when Alex held up a bracelet she had given him, engraved with the words "For the unseen cause," you could hear the chamber inhale in unison. Was it symbolic? Was it a confession? Or a quiet acknowledgement of the double lives played in politics? Kennedy never made it personal. He ended with grace. These are not attacks, they are facts, and they deserve daylight. The news broke like a wave. Commentators scrambled to analyze the fallout. Analysts leaned in, some praising AOC's bravery, others questioning the need for a lawsuit that seemed to crack her own foundation wide open. Polls dipped slightly. Independents grew wary. And Alex? He became a symbol overnight. Invited to town halls, interviewed across networks, painted alternately as a hero, a traitor, a kid caught in a grown-up war. Through it all, Kennedy stood firm beside him. "You stood up," he told him in a hallway after the hearing. "Now we help others do the same." And that's when they drafted their first joint call to action, demanding legislation that would require real-time transparency on NGO political funding. Over 600,000 people signed within 72 hours. The hearing had started with a lawsuit. It ended with a movement. Later, in an interview on a quiet podcast, Alex was asked, "Why now? Why take this risk?" He didn't flinch. Because silence doesn't protect the truth. It just protects the powerful. And Kennedy? He returned to his office that evening and looked out over a city that had grown used to shadows. "Sometimes," he murmured, "you don't fight a fire with fire. You fight it with light." And so they did, together. They say truth needs no defense. But in Washington, D.C., that's rarely true. In the weeks following Alex Rivera's testimony, the Capitol didn't sleep. Cable news played hearing clips on a loop. Radio hosts spun conspiracy or vindication depending on the dial. Social media turned Alex into a hashtag. Her Truth in Borders began trending, not just as a slogan, but as a litmus test. But for the people at the center of the storm, it wasn't a headline. It was life redefined. Alex had gone from a quiet staffer to the most watched whistleblower in the country, a kid with a conscience, now shadowed by security details and lawyers. One night, in his modest apartment near DuPont Circle, he stared at the walls, still trying to understand how his decision to tell the truth had led to this. His inbox was a battlefield. Praise from ethics advocates. Death threats from partisan trolls. Job offers, smear attempts, invitations to speak, subpoenas, and one letter that stopped him cold. A Department of Justice notice, subject named informal inquiry regarding federal misuse of funds and political concealment via NGO intermediaries. His hands shook. Not from fear, from weight. He wasn't a witness anymore. He was a key. In Senator Kennedy's office, the tone had shifted. No longer was this just about a lawsuit or one hearing. This had become federal. His staff worked 12-hour days, rotating between interviews, document prep, and stakeholder briefings. Kennedy himself moved with calm intensity, sleeves rolled up, the red file never far from reach. The DOJ had launched a formal ethics probe into multiple congressional offices. AOC's name was included, but so were others. What began with a single NDA had unraveled into a deeper inquiry. How often did lawmakers reroute public funds under vague policy umbrellas? How often were whistleblowers shut down by legal muzzle? Kennedy didn't bask in the spotlight. He sharpened focus. In a late-night strategy meeting, one staffer asked, "Senator, what if this turns ugly? What if they drag you in too?" He replied without hesitation, "Let 'em. If the price of truth is discomfort, I'll pay it twice." AOC, meanwhile, launched a counter-offensive. She took to social media in fiery bursts. Long threads filled with passion and policy, interviews on sympathetic networks where she dismissed the documents as misrepresented, out of context, politically motivated. But each rebuttal invited deeper scrutiny. Fact-checkers ran point-by-point reviews. Journalists dug deeper into her NGO connections. Former allies grew quiet. Rumors swirled that members of her own staff had lawyered up, and the suit she'd filed, originally meant to silence the criticism, was now in danger of being dismissed outright as a retaliatory action against a public oversight effort. The irony was thick. She'd gone to court to protect her brand, but the courtroom had become a theater for transparency. Back in a quiet office far from Capitol Hill, Alex met with a woman who had been watching closely. Carmen Diaz, former ethics counsel under 2 administrations, now a private sector watchdog. She sat across from him with a quiet respect. "You have 2 choices," she said plainly. You can ride this out, let the courts define your role, or you can lead, not as a symbol, as a movement. Alex looked at her, exhausted. I'm not a politician. I'm just someone who saw what didn't feel right. Exactly. She smiled. That's what makes you dangerous. Senator Kennedy kept steady. Each press conference was surgical, no ego, just substance. I'm not here to punish anyone, he repeated often. I'm here to ensure systems meant to serve the people don't become escape hatches for the powerful. One clip of him saying that on national TV racked up 12 million views in 3 days. Pundits began calling him the quiet reformer, a throwback, a disruptor not of party lines but of moral indifference. And quietly, behind the scenes, more staffers from other offices began to reach out to Alex. Anonymous emails. Voice notes. I saw the same thing where I worked. We were told to keep quiet. Thank you for speaking first. The silence was cracking. The DOJ called Kennedy in for questioning, not as a suspect, as a guide. He walked into the room alone. No cameras, no press, just a room of investigators with folders stacked high. He laid the red file on the table. I won't tell you what to think, but I'll show you what we've seen. Then you decide what justice requires. They listened. Every page, every timestamp, every signature. That night, Kennedy and Alex met again, this time over coffee in a side cafe near the Washington Monument under the soft glow of street lamps. You think it'll stick? Alex asked. Kennedy sipped his black coffee. I think the truth always does, eventually. Even if the cost is high, especially then. The higher the cost, the more it matters. Weeks later, the DOJ made it official. Multiple offices subpoenaed, NGO records seized. Whistleblower protections expanded, and internal congressional audits were underway. AOC's office issued a tight statement. We welcome full transparency and remain confident in our ethical record. But few were convinced. The tone had changed. She was no longer on offense, she was bracing. And Kennedy? He wasn't slowing. He proposed the Whistleblower Protection Expansion Act, co-sponsored by members on both sides of the aisle. The legislation guaranteed anonymity, legal support, and job security for congressional aides who raised red flags. When asked why he pushed the bill so soon after the suit, he simply said, because the people closest to the truth are often the ones least protected. That has to change. Alex became more than a symbol. He became a leader. He spoke at colleges, appeared on ethics panels, helped draft future reforms. He turned down book deals. He didn't want fame, he wanted change. In one panel discussion, a student asked him, what gave you the courage to speak up? Alex thought for a moment. Honestly, the idea of watching it happen again, that scared me more than staying silent. Kennedy returned to his district that fall, held town halls, answered every question, especially the hard ones. One woman asked what made this whistleblower different. He smiled. He told the truth before it was safe to. That's leadership in my book. The ripple effects spread. Other whistleblowers stepped forward. Petitions turned into policy drafts. Transparency became a national talking point, not a political weapon. And for the first time in years, public trust in congressional oversight ticked upward. By a little, but upward. Late one night, Kennedy stood alone at his office window, the lights of the Capitol gleaming beyond. He held the red file one last time. Then he placed it in the safe. Not because the story was over. Because the country had taken ownership of it. It didn't happen all at once. Movements never do. They start quietly, like water pressing against a dam. You don't notice the shift until it's unstoppable. In the weeks following the DOJ's sweeping inquiry, the political climate in Washington transformed. What began as a tense skirmish between a congresswoman and a senator had evolved into something larger, something less about individuals and more about systems. Across the country, something stirred. In coffee shops in Vermont, high school gyms in Ohio, farmers' markets in Arizona, people were talking not just about the case, but about what it revealed. Questions floated through the air. Where does our money go? Who decides what's hidden? And what happens when someone speaks up? Truth had become the topic of conversation. Not as a slogan, but as a value. And that shift, that subtle, powerful change, was the first real victory. Alex Rivera hadn't slept much. His days were now filled with meetings, interviews, messages from strangers sharing their own stories. Stories of school boards hiding expenditures, local governments stonewalling transparency requests, non-profits rerouting donations, The same silence he'd once felt, now others were feeling it too. And they were saying something. So he leaned in. Together with Kennedy's team, he launched the Open Borders Ethics Fund, a non-partisan initiative aimed at protecting whistleblowers and educating the public about transparency. The response was overwhelming. Donations flooded in. Volunteers signed up. Educators requested materials to bring the case into their classrooms as a civic lesson. For the first time, Alex stopped feeling like a victim of circumstance. He felt like a spark. Senator Kennedy remained measured, grounded, strategic. His style hadn't changed, but the scope of his work had. He began holding town halls focused entirely on ethics, not about partisanship, not even about AOC. Just simple, hard questions about government accountability. And people came. Not out of loyalty to a party, but because they saw something rare, a leader using his platform to empower rather than control. At one of these town halls, an elderly woman stood up. "Senator," she said, voice soft but firm, "I was raised not to talk about politics, but this isn't politics. This is principle." Kennedy tipped his hat. "Ma'am, principle's been waiting a long time for a microphone. I'm just glad we found it." In D.C., the air got heavier for Representative Ocasio-Cortez. The momentum that once fueled her rise, the social media storm, the firebrand interviews, the curated public image, began to falter. Not because of one scandal, but because of slow erosion. Facts had stuck. Documents had been verified. And now questions wouldn't go away. Why had her office routed funds through opaque NGOs? Why were former aides lawyered up? And why had she filed a lawsuit that seemed more and more like a preemptive strike against scrutiny? Her press conferences grew shorter. Her allies grew quieter. Her responses grew sharper. But the tide was turning, and it wasn't waiting for permission. The Transparency and Policy Funding Act, drafted with Kennedy's guidance, gained momentum in Congress. Initially mocked as a paper tiger, it soon drew unexpected support. Moderate Democrats, libertarians, even skeptical progressives. Why? Because it wasn't just about border policy anymore. It was about trust, about fixing the invisible spaces where money slipped through. Kennedy never bragged, never claimed ownership. He simply said, "The American people deserve receipts." And somehow, that hit harder than any soundbite. Meanwhile, Alex took a step he hadn't anticipated. He agreed to testify before a closed-door DOJ panel, not as a victim, as a guide. He walked them through everything, the altered language in policy memos, the NDAs' sweeping clauses, the meetings that shifted tone once questions were raised. When he left the room, one investigator shook his hand. "You didn't just help us build a case," she said. "You helped us understand the playbook." Outside, the public continued to stir. College students began holding campus audits, mock simulations of how public funds could be tracked more effectively. A group of high school seniors in Wisconsin started a podcast, The Open File, dissecting one federal funding program per episode. The cultural moment had shifted. Transparency wasn't boring anymore. It was a cause. AOC, now facing a formal ethics review, tried pivoting. She launched a new initiative on environmental justice. She took more control over her press appearances. She leaned into her progressive base harder than ever. But it wasn't landing. Even her most loyal followers began to hedge. "Maybe we need to ask some hard questions too," one youth organizer tweeted, and the replies? Thousands of likes. Thousands of echoes. Back in Kennedy's office, momentum wasn't slowing. He'd always believed government should function like a porch light, warm, steady, illuminating the dark corners. So he kept showing up. And now others joined him. More senators signed on to his bill. More staffers requested ethics training. And more citizens, teachers, farmers, cashiers wrote letters to his office asking how they could audit their own communities. His staff pinned those letters to the wall. Because change, they knew, doesn't start in committee rooms. It starts with people asking, "Wait, why?" One evening, Alex and Kennedy sat together on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the city lights reflecting in the Potomac below. "I didn't think it would go this far," Alex admitted. "Neither did I," Kennedy said. "But that's the thing about truth. It doesn't care how far you thought it would go. It just keeps walking." In a final act that surprised many, Alex was nominated for a National Ethics Award, usually reserved for journalists. He almost declined, but Kennedy called him personally. "Take it, not because it's for you, but because it tells others that telling the truth, is something this country still honors. And Alex, for the first time since the NDA, stood on stage and accepted it, to a standing ovation. Some legacies are written in headlines, others in hush. But the ones that last, they're etched into the quiet decisions we make when no one's watching. Months had passed since the hearing, since the lawsuit, since the country watched a policy aide shatter the silence and a senator guide the fallout with grace. But now, the system itself had changed. The Transparency and Policy Funding Act, once considered dead on arrival, passed with bipartisan support. It wasn't flashy, but it was revolutionary. A full public disclosure portal for federal NGO contracts, real-time tracking for aid allocations, strict timelines for ethics reviews, legal safeguards for whistleblowers, civil penalties for burying funds under miscategorized grants or shell entities. They named it Rivera's Law, not because Alex asked for it, but because the truth, once spoken, demanded a name. The signing ceremony wasn't grand. No balloons, no big stage, just a conference room in the Capitol, sunlight streaming in across a mahogany table. Kennedy stood quietly to the side as colleagues signed their names. Reporters captured the moment, but the senator said little, until someone asked why he had taken up this fight so fiercely. He simply replied, "Because if we don't guard the truth, it stops guarding us." AOC didn't attend. Her lawsuit had been quietly withdrawn months earlier. The ethics probe ended without formal charges, but left a shadow she couldn't shake. Her once unquestioned platform had fractured. Trust eroded, not from malice, but from unanswered questions. She still held office, still rallied crowds, but something had changed. The world had watched her prioritize silence over sunlight, and it remembered. Alex, meanwhile, had built something enduring. The Open Borders Ethics Fund grew from a non-profit into a national hub. They trained staffers, offered legal protections, launched educational materials now taught in schools. High school students reenacted the hearing for civics class. College campuses debated Rivera's Law in policy seminars. Social media influencers partnered with the organization to raise awareness on fiscal transparency. And everywhere he went, Alex said the same thing. You don't have to be loud to change something. You just have to refuse to look away. He toured town halls with Kennedy that spring. Together, they weren't politician and witness. They were allies in the deeper work of restoring trust. One night, in a packed auditorium in St. Louis, Kennedy stepped back and let Alex speak last. Alex took the mic slowly, the crowd settling. He didn't read notes. He didn't prep. He just told his story, of how he asked questions, and how the answers weren't welcome, and how truth once spoken has a way of never going quiet again. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Back in Washington, Kennedy's reputation soared. Not because he shouted louder than the rest, but because he didn't have to shout at all. He had let the facts speak, let the people rise, and let his leadership be a model, not a weapon. His colleagues praised his Conan, his persuasive integrity. He helped draft 2 more transparency bills. He hosted the first bipartisan ethics summit in a decade. He stayed late after hearings, not because he had to, because that's who he was. One evening, Kennedy visited a Louisiana community center he'd helped fund years ago. A group of middle schoolers approached. "You're the guy from the truth hearings, right?" one girl asked. He smiled. "I suppose I am." "Is it scary, telling the truth when it's not popular?" Kennedy knelt beside her. "It can be, but you know what's scarier? A world where nobody does." Alex eventually stepped away from the spotlight. He took time for himself, traveled, wrote in journals, reconnected with the quieter parts of life he had sacrificed. But wherever he went, the movement followed. Emails, letters, messages from kids, parents, even former government workers. "You reminded me it was okay to speak up. You helped me believe again. Thank you." He always wrote back, not long letters, just the truth. On the anniversary of Rivera's Law, Kennedy gave a rare televised address. Not a campaign ad, not a policy announcement, a reflection. He spoke slowly. "We've been reminded that transparency isn't paperwork, it's principle. That a single voice can ignite a shift. That silence isn't neutral, it's complicity. And that in every office, every boardroom, every classroom, there's someone with the power to say, 'This doesn't feel right.'" He ended with this. "What legacy will we leave behind? One of concealment or of courage? The choice is ours. It always has been." The hearing that started it all played again that night on PBS. Alex's voice, Kennedy's questions, the slow, steady walk towards something better. It didn't feel like a scandal anymore. It felt like a lesson, a moment that turned into a movement, and a movement that chose the legacy of truth.